The idea that humanity is alone in the universe is inconceivable. And the good news is we aren't, as these cases show. We ourselves are humanoids of high strangeness, and we are in good company.
Well, hey, everybody, welcome back.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, so we have got, no kidding, an amazing show lined up today.
Mm-hmm.
We have what I consider to be one of the greatest subject matter experts on UFO and ufology.
Absolutely.
And this man has been seen in a lot of places, not just on TV, but also he's a very accomplished author.
Mm-hmm.
And we took time to read his book, and we're very glad to have him. So just kind of getting started. The person, and of course, if you've seen this thumbnail, you already know who it is because you can click on it. But of course, we're talking about Preston Dennett. And Preston Dennett, he's got such a prolific biography. So I'm going to go ahead and read it to you because it's on his website. And I don't want to miss anything because it is chock full. I mean, this guy is amazing. So Preston Dennett has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomenon. He is a field investigator for Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of 30 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. Wow. Several of his books have been Amazon UFO bestsellers. His articles have appeared in numerous magazines, including Fate, Atlantis Rising, MUFON Info Journal, or MUFON UFO Journal, I should say, Nexus, Paranormal Magazine, UFO Magazine, Phenomena Magazine, Mysteries Magazine, Ufologist, and others. Writing has been translated into several languages, including German, French, Portuguese, Russian, and Icelandic. He has appeared on numerous radio and television programs, including Midnight in the Desert with Art Bell, Coast to Coast, and also History Channel's Deep Sea UFOs and UFO Hunters and Ancient Aliens. His research has been presented in the LA Times and in the LA News, the Dallas Morning News, and other newspapers. He has taught classes on various paranormal subjects and lectures across the United States. And I can't think of any other way to bring him on, and I think there is no other way to bring him on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's talk to Preston.
Mm-hmm.
Hey everyone, we are here with Preston Dennett. Preston, how are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, I'm doing
Awesome.
pretty good. How are you?
That's great. We're
Good.
great. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. We know you're very busy, so we appreciate you lending some time to sit with us and talk about some high strangeness and a lot of great things.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
So just kind of getting started, you have such a vast background. I know it's not with just ufology. I know that you have a vast background with pretty much everything paranormal. But I think for the means of this particular show, we're really just going to focus a little bit on the ufology and kind of UFOs and the humanoids, especially when we get to the book, because that's kind of what we're focusing on. But with that, could you kind of give us a little brief first intro and kind of how you became interested in ufology and UFOs?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's certainly not something I was looking for. I'd heard of UFOs, but I had no real interest in them because I didn't believe in them. I was
Right.
skeptical. I just did not think they were real. I felt like the stars were too far away, and people who saw UFOs were lying, hoaxing, hallucinating, misperceiving, which is kind of the government's, party line
Yeah.
in covering
Yes.
this up. Yeah, and I bought it.
Yeah.
Hook, line, and sinker
For
until
sure.
1986. And I was actually, 21 years old, so pretty young, and heard a report on the news about a sighting over Alaska. It's a super famous sighting,
Mm-hmm.
but in a nutshell, this Japanese commercial airliner and the whole crew had a UFO which paced their aircraft for over a half hour, nearly an hour, actually. And it was on radar, and it was a great case. The news report was very brief, kind of joking, almost
Yeah.
Surprise.
in a
Yeah.
skeptical way. But it interested me because I remembered my brother Mark had said he'd seen a UFO some years earlier. So that broke through my skepticism enough to ask my brother what he thought he saw.
Yeah.
Right.
It turned out he had an amazing sighting of a metallic disc with colored lights on it, very low. He chased it down the street with
Wow.
his two friends. I
Oh,
ended
so
up
it's
talking
more
to
than
them
just him.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started to get a real shock because a lot of people I knew had seen UFOs. Almost
Yeah.
none of them were alone. They all had witnesses with them. So yeah, it was not good news as far as I was
Right.
concerned.
Right.
But it
Yeah.
was upsetting. I mean, it really was. 'Cause
Mm-hmm.
this
Kind of
is
shakes up your perception of
Your whole
things.
belief system. Mm-hmm.
exactly not only
Yep.
shook it up, it smashed it to smithereens. It was
Yeah.
gone by the time I had talked to my family, friends, and coworkers. There was a good 10 or 20 of them who had really dramatic encounters. So yeah,
Wow.
that's how I got involved. I joined MUFON, the
Yes.
Mutual UFO Network, became a field investigator, and just kind of snowballed from there.
Sure. No, that's, it's funny because I find that there's such a lot of parallels with people who kind of get into this where, especially for us, and I know I speak for myself, and I know Nicole probably feels the same way, that
Mm-hmm.
we kind of believe that same thing, it's not existent. We're just doing our day-to-day routine. And inevitably something happens that kind of takes you into that whole new perspective of things. And I find that really timely. And I bring that up because obviously right now there seems to be such a, to me anyway, and especially for someone who is not maybe as into it every day, we don't, we're not constantly in the vein of ufology or anything like that, but the way it's become so mainstream, it almost feels like things are building to a fever pitch. Like there's now we've got government, releasing data. We've got people where it's getting a little bit more mainstream than it used to be, or at least a little bit more acceptable. Where if you say, "Hey, I saw a UFO," somebody doesn't look at you sideways and go, "I think this guy's kind of crazy."
I've gotten a few of those looks.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure.
Years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I got into this, it kind of split the family a little bit. I have 5 brothers and sisters, and there were the believers and the non-believers.
Yeah.
They thought I had
We
lost
have
my
that
mind.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we definitely fall in that camp because, I'm originally from the West Coast. And, with as much of, especially when I lived in Arizona, we had a lot of open sky, could see a lot of things. And I think sometimes we would see things in the sky at night and just go, yeah, okay, we know it's there, but acknowledge and just keep going, But, and then the Travis Walton thing came out, and that was really big for us when I was a kid, hearing about the fire in the sky in the movie and everything. But that's when I first started kind of key into it. But with that, one of the things I wanted to talk to you, especially, I'm actually from the West Coast. So I was raised in my early years, I was in Tucson, Arizona. And then my formidable years, I was in San Diego, California. And I find it odd because I was watching something with you on it, and you were talking about the USO incident, and I believe Catalina Island, I believe is what it is. Do you
Right.
mind talking about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. When I started investigating in really 88 is when I buckled down because it took me a year or two to wrap my head around this. I mean, I immediately, living very close to the coastline in Topanga Canyon, which is right outside of LA,
Right.
I started to get reports right away, right off the bat of what we would call USOs, unidentified submersible objects.
Right.
I remember the first one was from a therapist, actually. Linda Young was her name, driving along the Pacific Coast Highway and saw what she thought was a boat. It was floating on the water, but it didn't look like a boat. It was just this enormous bright white light. And she turned to the guy who was driving and said, "Look, what is that?" And as soon as he looked, this darn thing took off straight up and disappeared.
Wow.
So that was my first report. Then I got another report from a guy who's a doctor, and he lived in Malibu right on the beach, and he saw a USO. I started getting a lot more of these reports of these objects coming into the water, coming out of the water. Sometimes both. That's really rare, but there are cases. And started really looking into it after getting so many. And get this, I cataloged 150 cases right
Wow.
along that stretch of coastline between Catalina Island and the mainland.
Wow. That's so
150.
impressive.
It's wild.
Wow.
I find that so odd because, and of course we'll talk more about the sort of quote unquote classic, UFO, UAP type situation, but it almost feels like, of course there would be underwater. Why wouldn't there be? It almost, when it happens, it kind of turns a key in your head that says, if you are in that belief system and you believe that if there are visitors or whatever narrative you feel you believe, it almost seems conceivable that there would be some sort of underwater, because that's the majority of our planet. And if you wanted to stay somewhat stealthy, that would be the way to do it.
But wasn't that when you did the Valentich episode in Australia, somebody saw something coming up out of the water on that one as well.
Wow. Yeah. I think it goes on a lot more than people realize. It just wasn't getting any attention until recently. I started to become the go-to guy for USOs. I don't know how that happened. But
well, I mean, maybe 150 cataloged events. That's for sure.
No kidding.
That's awesome. And if I remember this correctly, and if at least I have my facts right, that's sort of the Tic Tac sighting. I was in the Navy for a while, and not then, but it's been a while. But when I was in, my understanding is, especially where they saw this and how carrier air groups work, it's really surprising to me that actually got out. And that there is that tangible evidence, because having been in that world, that's information that doesn't get released without a lot of people signing off on it. And if I remember correctly, now it's with the Tic Tac situation. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, I agree. And it really makes me wonder really how many reports there are that we don't hear about.
Oh, for sure.
I always ask people when I interview them, like, did you report your sighting to the police, the Air Force, to MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, or any organization? Almost never do they do. So you could, 150 reports. I think you could times that. Let's be frugal and just say 10. That would be 1,500. But really, it would be a more accurate times it by 100.
Yeah.
I think.
Gosh, that's something else. And it's amazing to me that just that small little portion of it, and especially with all the information in your book that we're going to get to here, but to know that just that little part of it, even you yourself has cataloged 150 different reports. So it's like, you're right. If you take just that small little bit of it and expound it on what could actually be out there and that people have seen, I mean,
that's just in California, like
that
little bitty area. So the entire world, you can only imagine what there is.
For sure. Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate you talking
more
a
than
little
the general public realizes.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. And since starting this show, that's kind of what we do. We're kind of middle of the road. We give information out and let people kind of decide what it is they want to, whatever they feel they want to believe. But you're right. I think if a lot of this got out more, it wouldn't be so
taboo.
Yeah, taboo. Taboo is a great way to say it. But kind of leaning into the wind a little bit, we have this great book that we've both read. We're big fans of it. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little bit briefly about your new book, Humanoids and High Strangeness?
Yeah, I'm super excited about this one for a lot of reasons. Each chapter focuses on people who've had direct face-to-face contact with humanoids of some kind. So we're moving well beyond simple sightings here. A number of them do involve not only face-to-face contact, but onboard experiences as well, and a wide variety of humanoids. I think the grays, as we call them, get a lot of attention, but there's many different types that people see. So yeah, grays for sure. Yeah. I mostly get grays, 50-60%, but also human looking, very much like us. Or praying mantis ETs. Or there's a case involving the little blue beings. or
Yeah.
hairy
Mhm.
dwarves, tall whites, many different kinds.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that. Also, I
awesome.
think it's really interesting with this book is I've got to cover cases not only across the United States, but there's some in Canada, 2 in South America, one, let's see, Argentina, one in Brazil. There's a case from England, France, Germany. So you're getting a cross-cultural perspective, which is important because this is a worldwide phenomenon.
Sure.
A lot of people are seeing this.
Mhm.
And another theme that I really wanted to dig into was the high strangeness, because I think there's a misconception that when people have contact, it's all about being taken on board and physically examined by grays and being put back. When
Mhm.
really it's much more than that. And there's a very pronounced and prominent psychic and spiritual and paranormal aspect to UFO encounters that I know actually gets edited out of some people's accounts because I've talked to them.
Right.
They've, their story is written up in another book, and they're like, well, they didn't put this part in,
Hmm.
which was,
That's
how they started having
interesting.
out of body experiences or precognitive dreams, or I mean, you name it, the entire range of paranormal events.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got to be honest. Reading this, it was so interesting, and I will say, almost every single story, the hair on my arms raised up a little bit in the beginning, just because you haven't heard to this extent.
Right.
I never have, anyway. I was just kind of blown away by all these stories and and how similar they were between certain people.
Right.
The same type of experience in the beginning, afterwards, all those types of things. Really kind of it gave me a different perspective. Just like you said, the typical is, oh, they've been taken, cut open and then put back. But that is definitely not the case in this book of what you read. It
Right.
is very interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's awesome to see the amazing commonalities and corroborations from people who don't even know each other and live in
Right.
different parts of the country and had,
Right.
completely. How could they have these same exact details if this wasn't absolutely true?
And in
Yeah.
some cases, they don't even speak the same language. So how could they collaborate?
Right.
Yeah, we I find it interesting because we mentioned all the different types of beings, humanoids that are kind of represented, and especially with myself, I always sort of thought of sort of the classic gray type thing with I always remember Whitley Strieber's book where right in the front of it you've got this classic gray humanoid alien, and in my mind that's always been if you have to have the gold star of what a species would look like if they were to visit us. And it really took a long time once, especially reading books like yours and talking to people who are subject matter experts, where you're like, why wouldn't it just be one type of species? Obviously there's got to be more than one. It would be almost it would almost be ridiculous to think that only if there was that capability that only one type of entity or one type of visitor would be just this one particular type species.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's weird because, I'd heard about ETs prior to becoming involved in this field. And I kept hearing, reports of humanoids. And I'm like, well, this sounds kind of Star Trek-y to me.
Yeah.
I just I don't know if it would be that way. And this is just a pure assumption based on really nothing but my own prior beliefs about, with no actual knowledge base to it. I was looking
Right.
for ETs that would have tentacles and
Yeah.
like the Blob or something completely different.
For
Right.
sure.
And that's just not the case. And this is amazing to me that they are pretty much universally all humanoid, bipedal beings with arms and legs, a head, and so forth, and with some looking just like us. This has got some serious implications, I think, about who these ETs are and their relationship to us, and frankly, where we come from. And if they look just like us, what does that say about human evolution?
Right.
It certainly doesn't make it a black and white case,
No.
in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
it's
was
amazing.
Richard's story. You don't have to go into detail because I want people to read your book. And
Right.
actually, I just kind of wanted to touch on something about his implant. He had an implant in the nose, and he went to the doctor. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, his daughter actually.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right. The daughter. Yeah.
Yep. It's such an amazing case. This guy is such a nice guy and really wanted to do his part to let people know his experience because he knows there's a lot of other people out there going through this.
Mm-hmm.
And it is kind of a long story, so I'll try to shorten it
Yeah.
as best as I can.
Right.
But at age 7, he suddenly developed insomnia for no reason he could think of, a fear of intruders, and just unable to sleep at night. And grew up into an adult. He was like 20, 22 years old. And his mom, Ines, decided she's going to quit smoking. She's going to go to a hypnotherapist and quit smoking. And she said, Richard, how about you come with me and we'll have the hypnotist work on your insomnia. So long story short, they did. And she recalled being taken on board a craft and seeing her son. Now he's in the waiting room. He doesn't know this. He goes to the hypnotherapist and recalls being taken on board and being physically examined by Greys. And he said it was quite scary, though he doesn't think that they were mean or evil or anything. It was just a little frightening for a 7-year-old boy.
Yeah.
But he does remember seeing his mom. So they both corroborated each other's story. And afterwards, she says, Richard, I had an experience at age 7. So that was when he had his experience. So Richard grows up, gets married, has kids, has a 7-year-old daughter. And he's watching TV one day and turns out to be a show on UFOs. And an image of a gray ET comes on the screen. And his little daughter, 7 years old, drops her Barbie dolls, and runs up to him and starts tugging on his arm, saying, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. And he's like, stop, I'm watching TV. She's like, no, it's important. And finally he turns to her and says, what is it? And she points to the TV, said, that's what's coming into my room at night and poking my nose. So she was having unexplained nosebleeds at this time. This is a sign of contact sometimes.
Right.
And they went to the dentist because they had a scheduled appointment. They were going to take her to the doctor after they went to the dentist. But they already had made this appointment, so they went to the dentist. And the dentist takes the x-rays and angrily comes up to Richard and says, you're supposed to tell me if your daughter's had surgery or any kind of implant. And Richard says, what are you talking about? She's never had surgery. She doesn't have an implant. And the dentist says, well, yes, she does. Here's the x-ray. What's that? And it showed this tiny little rod embedded in her upper sinus. And not in a way that she could have stuck something up there. This was embedded in the tissues.
Right.
And Richard's like, well, I don't know what that is. And he asked the dentist, and the dentist says, I don't know. Let's leave it alone. And Richard ended up going to another doctor who refused to make much comment on it or really take any action whatsoever. So he ended up going to a series of doctors trying to find someone who would at least take him seriously or take a look at it.
Yeah.
And finally he found a doctor who took a look at the x-ray and said, okay, come to my office. He closed the door and opened his desk and pulled out this file and handed it over, slid it across the desk to Richard and said, if you tell anyone I showed you this, I'm going to deny it. And this was a government document which said to the doctor, if you find any implant, any artificial object in somebody, you are not to remove it. You are to leave it alone. Removing it, you could face severe fines. You could lose your license, which is in essence what this document said.
Right.
And the doctor told Richard, doctors all over across the United States receive this document. This is why you were getting the runaround with the other doctors, because they know about this.
That is, that is just
not the first
amazing.
news I had. Like,
Yeah.
can you imagine?
I was just like, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not too surprised about that. But yeah, it's just like this mass cover up. How has this lasted for so long that we've never heard this before?
Yeah.
I
And
mean, they're just
Yeah.
terrified. Yeah.
and to have an entire medical community have to do the exact same thing. That's so, you know, this is kind of a little off topic, but I was always a big fan of like Philip K. Dick novels and stuff where you get into this whole dystopian society
Sure.
and everything. And, you know, you always say to yourself, well, that probably couldn't happen. People wouldn't do that. And then that kind of corroboration tells you that maybe there is some truth to that there would be this dystopian cover up that says, no, we will not talk about that.
Yeah, that's what really got me fired up to do UFO research was when I found out there was a cover-up,
Mm-hmm.
which
Yeah.
is so easily provable. I mean, it's undeniable, and it just
Oh, yeah.
burns me up because this is our tax dollars.
Yeah.
And they're
Oh,
calling
yeah.
us
Exactly.
liars. Ooh,
Yeah.
that made me angry.
And
Mm-hmm.
I would
Yeah,
imagine it would make people, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah, I definitely agree. That would make a lot of people. It did make me angry just reading it from the book.
yeah, I talked to another guy who had an implant and had the X-rays or looked at them, and then went to
Mhm.
the doctor and requested them and got the X-rays, and it had been airbrushed out or altered in some way, so his implant
Really?
didn't show there anymore.
Wow.
Well, that
So
was
they're
before it become-
removing them from the X-rays?
That is so illegal on so many levels.
It's
Wow.
not right. It's just unethical. And doctors, take a vow, a Hippocratic oath.
Right.
Right.
And
But I guess if you look from their perspective, they've went to school all these years, to become a doctor, and then it's a risk of losing everything if they say anything.
Right. But that's
So
like,
that's I mean, I know
that's a
morally,
HIPAA violation. That's so
morally-
illegal.
yes, it is.
Wow.
But if the government's, when government comes in and tells you can't do something, most people
Yeah.
listen. Unfortunately, that's crazy.
Yeah. Well, we're in a
The other
tough
thing I
situation.
noticed, between all these stories, the precognitive dreams, after the abductions, a lot of these people have psychic abilities, things like that. That was a commonality between the majority of these stories I noticed in your book. That just seems crazy to me.
Right.
Like, what would that be? Like, why are they getting these just from being taken on board a craft?
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Mhm.
And I felt the same way. I'm like, wow, this is a commonality. This is more the rule than the exception.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I really made a point, having learned this, because it took some time to realize this is something a lot of people are reporting. I
Mhm.
didn't know to ask these questions. Now I
Right.
do. And
Yeah.
it's funny to hear these people say, well, actually, yeah, I do have dreams that come true all the time. It freaks me out, and it didn't
Yeah.
start until I
Mhm.
started having contact. It's not always the case. Some people are psychic before,
Right.
Yeah.
but definitely after. So I think there's something going on here. And in
Mhm.
fact, I've talked to enough contactees who were told by the ETs that said, "This is our gift to you."
Hmm.
I've heard that same phrase at least 3 times. that
Really.
People were told that by the ETs. This is our gift to you for having worked with us. So they are absolutely. I think there's something about the experience itself which
Right.
ignites your psychic abilities because, for a number of reasons, when you're taken on board, they are communicating telepathically.
Right.
The ETs themselves are very psychic. I mean,
Right.
they're walking
Mhm.
through walls and levitating and doing telepathy and definitely can perceive future events because they give warnings and stuff all the time.
Mhm.
So I think this is one of their goals with people is to wake us up to our own supernatural abilities. I don't like to call them supernatural because I think they're actually natural.
I do too.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think
Just been so closed off for so long.
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we do have the ability to do astral projection and past life recall and healing and remote viewing and mediumship and precognition is a big one. Richard himself had many examples where he got really well known in his family. He'd write them down in envelopes and seal them so he could prove it to people. He
Right.
saved his daughter from being killed. Basically, he said, you know what? I saw you working on a car, the jack falling, and you being crushed. She's like, well, actually, I'm supposed to work on the car tomorrow. He says, don't get under that car.
Mm-hmm.
And she did. She went under it and then remembered and quickly got out. And she told everyone, get out from under the car, get out. And no sooner had they all got out from under this car when it collapsed. She called him crying.
Yeah, that would make me cry for sure. Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine? He says it really bothers him. He's like, I don't know why this is happening. I think it's
very
a good
frightening.
thing. Yeah, it's difficult because a lot of the times people are seeing, tragedies or negative events.
Right. Right.
Which I think is it's good to have a warning.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, his son,
It is.
I think it was his son. He said, he asked his son, do you drive with a water bottle between your legs? Because he had seen this. Seen the water bottle slipping down and getting under the brake and causing an accident. And his son said, well, yeah, I do, Dad. He said, don't do that. Don't do that. He's like, why? What are you talking about? He says, just don't do it. Well, he did it. And of course, the bottle slid right under the brake pedal and he rear-ended somebody. He's like, I'm sorry, Dad. I should have listened to you.
Yep. Which most kids say to their parents after the fact.
Yeah.
They've been told not to do something.
I find that so interesting because, and you touched on a little bit that, during the experience, when they're taken aboard, or even in some of the cases in the book where they're sort of checking back up on some of these people, that gift almost seems like, hey, we're giving this to you because that's the way we communicate. So it's almost like a way of almost like a transceiver or some kind of radio to be able to still not just talk to them, but monitor them and look out for them. Especially with some of the stories in there, and Birch being one of them, where you kind of have that feeling like it's not just a gift; it's almost like a tool, it's a radio almost to me.
Walkie-talkie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And just imagine if all of us were at that level where we could communicate telepathically and read each other's minds and know if someone's lying or consumed with greed and corruption. It could change the world.
It sure
would
would.
absolutely make a huge difference. It's time that we all come together and just start living with truth and compassion and love for each other.
I
which
agree.
I think is what
I agree.
they're trying so hard to do. We're spiritually bereft in a lot of ways. It's causing all kinds of problems. And they're trying to wake people up.
And speaking on that, I'm going to go on to the next topic because, this is not the first time I've kind of heard about warnings. And you mentioned it a little bit earlier about warnings. If you want to talk a little bit about the mantis beings and showing us humans images. I'm just going to say images and let you fill in the rest.
Yeah, this is something I do hear a lot from really all different types of ETs, but I love that particular case involving a lady named Sandra, who was just a little girl. Gosh, let me see. I think she was 12 years old. I've got my notes right here. 'Cause I know she was pretty young. Let's see. Oh no, 8. She was 8 years old.
Wow.
When she had this experience in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and this is some time ago, 1947. And she had a friend who lived about a mile away on a reservation. And so she would periodically ride her bicycle to her friend's house. And she asked her mom not too early, but in the morning, if she could go over and visit her friend. Her mom's like, sure, of course. So Sandra got on her bike and was going down this road, which is not a busy road, and was about halfway there when this shadow came over the road. And she looks up and sees this craft landing plunk right on the road in front of her, covers the road from one side to the other. So not a huge craft, but definitely not small either.
You're not going to miss it.
No, you can't get by it.
Right.
And she stops on her bike and is looking at this thing. And a door opens and there's a figure in there. And she's like, oh my, that looks like a 6-foot tall bug. And sets down her bike because this figure is beckoning towards her. And as she gets close, she sees it. Well, this is kind of like a praying mantis. At age 8, I'm not sure if she knew, in hindsight, I was like, yeah,
Right.
that looked like a praying mantis.
Right.
But it was very friendly and kind of beckoned her to come on board, and which she did, because she's like, wow, this is interesting. She had no fear. And once on board, this being says, you can call me mother, which I thought was really interesting.
That is interesting.
And yeah. And she saw these little, short little beings, which she first thought were kids, because they were kind of skipping around and chirping and chirruping and being very playful. And she's looking at them. She's like, oh, these aren't kids. They're bald. They have dark eyes, gray skin, large heads. They're grays. Back then, there was no term for that. But later, again, in hindsight, she's like, oh, that's what they were. Because eventually this did get into the media. And she says they led her on to the craft, which is rounded, much larger on the inside than on the outside, which is a neat detail I hear from people. Very clean, very sparse, not a whole lot in there. They took her to one of the windows, and she was amazed to see that it was nothing but stars out there. She had just been on the ground, and she didn't feel any movement. She's like, wow, we're already in outer space. This is crazy. And they took her to the center of the room where there was this little, kind of like a TV. She didn't have a TV at that time, but later that's what it looked like. And it was projecting this hologram in full living color, not super large, a couple of feet by a couple of feet of full color images. And they were moving. And she's looking at them, focusing on them, and she sees that these were scenes of war, tanks on the streets and soldiers fighting and bombs exploding and this sort of thing. Didn't have a TV at that time. And they told her basically that this is going to happen, that humanity is on the wrong path, and that you need to do your part to tell people that this is not right. And she's thinking to herself, well, I'm 8 years old. What do you want me to do?
Right.
I'm just a kid.
I haven't got so much leverage.
And she did not tell her parents after she got returned. They were searching for her, by the way, going up and down that road looking for her. And she was not there. And apparently they had taken her bike too, because the bike wasn't there either. But after going down that road a fourth time, they found her lying next to her bike. She was in a daze. So she was physically taken. And I asked her, what did you tell your parents? And she said, no, are you kidding? They're not going to believe me. She did try telling, she did tell her grandmother, because her grandmother said, oh yeah, I've seen beings when I was a little girl, your age. This is generational. But yeah, they gave her warnings. She tried telling her school friends, but they just kind of laughed at her. So she ended up keeping pretty quiet about it for a long, long time. But not the only case like that in the book. There's another lady, Susan, who had the same sort of thing, where she was given warnings about our warlike ways, showed images, the same, really almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
So it's astonishing to me that they're doing this.
I'm glad you brought up Susan, because I copied down the quote from her in the book. And I'd like to read it because I think it was so profound, I think. So basically she says, the images were exactly the same thing that I remember seeing in those recurring dreams as a child. The military tanks in the street, bombs and destruction around us, dark skies and starvation. If we don't change our ways and you can't make a difference, this will happen. We would have wars in our streets and chaos. Every one of you have got to make a change, because if you don't, this is what's going to happen. It stressed my responsibility as a human being to do my best and pass on the word to others. It showed me the urgency to stop the warlike ways on this planet, or we would perish. It showed me that love and nothing but love will change this world. And I just thought that was just an amazing quote from her. And once again, speaking about love and trying to come together and change things. They're attempting. They're very, they're trying to help us help ourselves, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful statement, and one I hear quite often. And it really concerns me when I hear these fear-based accounts of people saying, this was, a terrible thing. And some of this is
Yeah.
flat out lies and disinformation.
Sure.
Mhm.
Some people are truly terrified. I get it. It's not
Yeah.
always easy.
Oh
But
no.
when I keep hearing this, it's like, well, clearly they're concerned. They're
Right.
they're they're concerned about our well-being.
Mm-hmm.
So this, I think, speaks towards their benevolence. And there's so many cases like this.
I know.
So
Right,
many.
right.
If you get a message, it's going to be along those lines. Warnings
Mhm.
against nuclear proliferation, our
Right.
warlike ways, the destruction of the environment, psychic
Yes.
development, spiritual, morals.
Mhm.
Right.
So
And I just want to
this
mention it
really
real.
speaks to these things are.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
I just want to mention it really quick because of time, but we did an episode on the UFO in Zimbabwe, the aerial school and all the kids. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And that was my first account. When I came across that, I was just like, I had no words. It really impacted me. And I bring it up all the time whenever we do an episode on UFOs, because appearing to children, and all this telepathic and basically showing them, how the environment, how we're, destroying the earth basically. And like giving them warnings once again, like if we don't stop this, your entire planet's going to be burning. You're going to have nothing left. You need to take care of the planet. And that really impacted me. They're just warning us over and over. And then when I read your book, I was like, oh my gosh,
There
they're
it is
warning us to
again.
stop with the fighting, stop with this and stuff. It's like, they're just trying to help us. I don't know. It's shocking to me because you don't really hear about it that much. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, I know that case well. It made me
Yeah.
cry. It really did.
Yeah. It
And
made me cry too.
I,
The one
they're so
about
sweet.
but the one kid saying something about, they showed him pictures of like the trees all burning, and the planet burning. It really did. It brought tears to my eyes. It was really, really sad.
It hits really hard because, if obviously, and I would understand that there's got to be, if there's several different species, I'm sure there's got to be bad actors, so to speak, out there that may want to cause us harm. But at this particular point, nobody has. And the only thing that we've seen up to this point is all these cases where they're truly trying to help us out. Especially in the case of, like you had mentioned with the two in your book and with the aerial school, if in fact we're to believe, the humanoid existence, and, if that's the feeling that everybody has when they look at this, they're almost like a reflection of us in a way too. I know there's a lot of belief that we come from, or, at least have some kind of lineage, so to speak, but it almost seems like, wouldn't that be something that a caring group or a caring individual would want to do, is to help out, someone that they see clearly not on the right path?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think we do share a common heritage with them. That's certainly the message contactees get. I've talked to so many people who've had this experience. And while it can be scary, I've got no cases of what I would call sadistic behavior, or intentionally hurting, or even trying to scare somebody. That's us putting our own cultural mores and
Yes.
behavior onto them. Transference, kind of. We're the ones who are hurting each other. It's the people on Earth I'm more concerned about having contact with than the ETs.
Agreed.
The schoolyard cases are so amazing, because when I heard about the Rua Zimbabwe case, I instantly thought of, well, there's that case in Australia, the Westall High School. I
Yeah.
thought, wait, there's that one in Opelika, Florida, the Crestview Elementary School, Broadhaven Elementary School in Wales, the Hillsdale College incident. That's still, young people. And I started digging deeper, and I found 100 cases of UFOs hovering over schools, or actually landing next to them. Humanoids are coming out in 1/3 of the cases.
Wow.
These are very long-lasting, low-level daylight sightings.
Yeah.
Really a strong introduction to the phenomena, and I think a very effective method of announcing their presence, and really sort of cementing the idea that we are not alone into popular culture. It's just, boy, those schoolyard cases are so poignant, really touching.
Yeah.
There's so
Yeah,
many.
I saw that you had a book on that because I looked over because you've got what, like 30 books that you've written. So, and I was kind of grazing over that. I'm like, oh, that's the next one I'm reading because the Zimbabwe case like really got me amped. And so I really I'm going to check that out next and read about those because I mean, if you're going to appear to anyone, adults kind of have their already preconceived notions, right? And we don't like to bend very easily.
We're jaded at that point.
Right. So you appear to kids because kids are more open. They're more likely to listen and it's going to impact them for the rest of their life. And then maybe when they become adults, they'll try to do the right thing.
Right.
I mean, that's
Yeah, it's
what I
amazing
think they're
'cause
doing.
a lot of them had never heard of a UFO. They
Mhm.
don't
Right.
have fear of someone who looks a little different.
Right.
It's so
It's a
amazing to hear their
concept.
testimony. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have no idea. To them, there's no concept of anything other than what they know. So, you know, they don't have any preconceived notions. So that when something like that does happen, not only does it add, you know, some levity to it because, you know, it's a child, but it also, they're not the greatest liars. They're going to tell you straight out what
Well,
they
and
saw.
they're very curious,
Yeah.
especially at that age.
For
Exactly.
sure.
Super
They're
curious.
excellent witnesses, really. People are like, well, it's just
Absolutely.
a child. I'm like, well, wait a second. You know, they
Mhm.
don't have a belief system where they filter everything through.
Yeah.
'Cause
Right.
I've interviewed a lot of adults who are like, well, I saw a demon. I'm like, well, no, just tell me what you saw.
Yeah.
Don't try
Mhm.
to interpret it.
Yeah.
Just explain to me exactly what you saw.
Right.
And that's what I
Absolutely.
love about children because they're sponges and they soak up knowledge and they're very good observers,
Mhm.
actually.
Yeah.
And those
They
schoolyard
are.
cases, it's not just one kid. It's usually a
No.
whole crowd of them and the teachers. In more than half the
Yeah.
cases, the teachers are there
Mhm.
going, oh, what?
Right.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, I know the aerial school, it was like, what, 60 kids or something like
That
that.
was quite a few.
And they, you know, and we had this on our episode.
Mhm.
I made sure they had them draw what they saw in the accounts, you know, in kid pictures. I mean, the craft looked, you know, very similar,
Mhm.
you know, in shape and size
Right.
and what they saw and what they heard. And it just, kids they can't come together, 60 of them, and collaborate and be like, okay, this is what we're going to say. And this is what we're going to draw, you know, that adults can't even do
No,
that.
I was going to say it's
But,
hard enough for us to do it.
Yeah. But yeah. With kids, it really, I don't know.
Well, one of the things I had wanted to ask you was, do you have a particular case that you were really fond of, or is it kind of with because I know you kind of mentioned that kind of strikes a chord with the child visitations and the schoolyards. Is that kind of where you will find you more fascinated in as far as cases?
Oh, it's very hard to pick because
Yeah,
I've
I'm sure.
interviewed a lot of people. I mean,
Mhm.
schoolyard case it knocked my socks off. I'd been in this
Yeah.
field for some 30 years already, and I had no idea that was a thing.
Yeah.
But I'd say of all the cases I've ever investigated overall, there's a few that absolutely stand out. And one would be involving a nurse by the name of Dolly Safran, who I ended up writing a whole book on because her case is the most extensive I've ever had the privilege to research. A former nurse and worked in the Department of Defense, a really good witness, a lifeguard, a zookeeper, and this amazing woman who had, from age 14 onwards, fully conscious contact. No missing time. She remembers, she's not frightened, and has worked very closely with Greys mostly, but different types of ETs. And they've taught her so much. They taught her actually how to fly the craft and how they fly.
Wow.
She sits in the seat and flies them. And I know
Wow.
how this might sound to a skeptic, but I've
Mhm.
already received a number of cases like that. Not as
Wow.
extensive. But
Okay, that's a
man,
book
oh
I'm
man,
reading.
yeah, her case. I ended up writing a whole book on that called Symmetry.
I remember
And
that.
Oof, I mean, I could talk for hours and hours on just her case alone. It's
Wow.
hands down my favorite, I would say.
Mm.
I could see why. That is, to be honest with you, that's the first time I've ever heard of something
Yeah,
like that.
I
So
haven't heard that one.
that is pretty
I'm
profound.
telling
I
you,
had
it's
no,
true.
that is wild.
Yeah, Grant Cameron, he's a Canadian researcher, wrote a book called Sky Pilots. He interviewed some 60 people who had that experience. I'm like, yes.
Really?
So I'm so glad because, I tell people this and they're like, you're kidding. I'm like, no, this is a thing. They will
That's
give you a tour
amazing.
of the craft. They'll take you down to the engine room. They'll take you up to the observation deck, to the control room, and tell you how they fly. We'll sit you down in the seat. It's if you can just move past the fear of contact, it changes completely. Because no one likes being physically examined, and that does happen. No one really likes going to the doctor, and especially if the doctor is a little different looking.
Well, yeah.
But
For sure.
but that's why they pull people on board, is to heal them. I wrote a book on just healings, some 300 cases.
Really? I'll have to read that one too.
If you look at the onboard experience and what actually happens, and throwing away what you think happens, and looking what actually happens, you'll see it's a very benevolent experience overall.
I got to admit, I'm a little gobsmacked. Threw me for a loop. I had no idea that was an actual reported encounter. That is, I'll admit, I'm floored. Thank you for sharing that, because learning something new every day, and it's just amazing, because I had no idea that even existed.
I've never heard that before.
Wow.
Yeah, the first time I heard it, I'm like, what? What are you telling me?
Boom. Wow. Well, here we are. We've talked about the book, and by the way, absolutely love it. I know we've talked about it and we hail it, but it was definitely one of those where, and I know Nicole mentioned it, there were times where I'm like, I may want to read some of this during the daylight, because it's just a little. I've had incidences that I have personal that I've experienced, and I'm sure Nicole has too, and we talk a little bit about it, but some of it hit a little close to home, so it was like, eek. But aside from the book, do you want to talk more about kind of what you've got going on, and is it just the book, or I know that you've got some other ventures going on?
Oh yeah, I have a YouTube channel where I put out a lot of my research for those who don't have the time to read or the money to afford books and stuff. I have a podcast I do actually with Dolly Saffron, who's
really
the one I just talked about, called The Light Gate, where we're interviewing some of the witnesses that I get to interview and bring their stories forth, or other researchers and experiencers. Always working on new projects, new books. So I'm keeping busy for sure. This is an important subject.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
With the uptick of sightings and with the government coming out, I'm sure people maybe feel a little bit more comfortable in speaking with you now, as opposed to before.
For sure.
Do you feel
they're even letting me use their names? So
that's amazing,
and not
that's
pseudonames.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know I touched on it a little bit before, and I just spoke about on my end, but do you feel that fever pitch? Do you feel like we're almost at a tipping point, that there's something kind of about to happen, or do you feel it's always been there and we're just now being aware of it?
I think that the events are escalating in terms of public awareness, for sure. And disclosure does seem to be ramping up. I honestly don't feel our government, or people behind the cover-up, the secret government, if you will, are ever going to be truthful or transparent. I think it's a waste of time to look to them for answers, because they've lied from day one and are still lying. Yeah. They are saying, well, we don't have enough evidence. Yes, you do.
Yeah.
You know exactly what this is.
Right.
So I'm a little bit on the fence about that, but it's amazing to see this subject being, like you said, pushed into the mainstream, being discussed on 60 Minutes, and all these TV programs about it, and people coming forth in large numbers, and whistleblowers. It's a absolute new age. I would say a complete turnaround from how it's been for a long, long time.
For sure. I mean, I'm a fan of a lot. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a fan of a lot of stuff, and kind of a little off script, but I listen to Smartlist, with all the Jason Bateman and all those guys. And I never thought I would be in the car driving to the store and literally on their episode talk about the UFO hearings in the government. I'm like, wow, that is the last place I would have ever thought that something like that would actually be brought up, and how mainstream it's become.
I just think they finally had to say something.
Yeah.
Because we all have cell phones. We can all videotape. We know everybody knows there's something, so they had to come out and say something. Probably won't get any information like you said. But
I totally
like, yeah,
agree,
they're real.
Because if they didn't say something, they were going to look like idiots. Irrelevant,
Right.
not believable. They
Yeah.
have to.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, they're real.
Well, listen, Preston, we know we're so glad you took the
Yeah,
time
we're
to sit
so
down
grateful.
with this.
Yeah.
And we thank you so much. Again, our audience, please pick up Humanoids and High Strangeness. It's a fantastic book. 20 true stories. You won't get bored because trust me, there's no boredom in it. It is a page turner, and it's 20 stories that will literally leave you guessing for a lot of different things.
We heard each other reading it.
Yeah.
And I had read it first.
Yeah.
I read it first, and he was hearing me. And then when he read it, I hear him go, I'm like, which part are you at?
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun. But thanks again, and we'll let you get back some time.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on the show. It's an honor and a delight. So I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
That was a lot of information.
that was a lot of information. My mind is literally blown. That with driving the UFO, with being allowed to drive. I mean, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know I never heard anything like that. And I mean,
No. And we know a lot more than probably the listeners because we've read this one book of his
right.
out of the 30.
Yeah.
You should really go check him out.
Yes.
Check him out.
By all means.
It is something you probably never heard before. I mean, there's some things, a few that they touch on, but I had never.
No. No, I mean, you can tell we're pretty
Yeah.
at a loss for words because of the interview you just witnessed. And just the fact that
There's so much more in this book.
Yeah.
We just touched on a few things.
layers.
Yes. So definitely check out his books. He also has a website you can go to and check out all the goods on him.
Yep.
It's www.prestondennett.weebly.com. That's WEEBLY.
Yep.
And so you can go check him out there.
Yeah.
And we kind of want to in this show this is a quote by Preston Dennett in his book. And I just kind of want to go out with this.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So these are Preston's words. For me, the real takeaway from all these accounts is that the UFO experience is ultimately a human experience, a reminder that we live in a wonderfully mysterious universe with infinite possibilities. High strangeness is really only in our minds. If all these cases were acknowledged more openly and discussed with frank honesty, they would cease to be considered strange and would instead be viewed for what they really are, part of the adventure of being a human on planet Earth.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Music by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. Check out our YouTube at Generation X Paranormal. Also, check out our Facebook, Generation X Paranormal Podcast. Love to have you. See you then.